Hey, I'm Matt Smith back here with you. Week 7 SEC preview today. Into the second half of the season for much of the league. Only a couple of teams have had their off week, so pretty crazy. But a lot of the league has turned the corner into the second half of the schedule. We have all 14 teams playing conference games this week. Only time in the 2021 season that will happen. So let's go through them. We'll just go in chronological order. There's not one really super huge matchup. There's kind of 6 of the 7 games that are all intriguing for various reasons. So we'll just go in order that they're going to be played. So starting off, high noon on CBS, Auburn and Arkansas, both teams now with 2 losses. Hogs taken 2 the last couple of weeks in tough road games at Georgia and at Ole Miss. Auburn kind of just beaten down by Georgia last week, hung in there for a quarter or so, but never was really in that game with the Dogs. So both teams looking to rebound, still with some outside hopes of maybe getting back into the New Year's Six picture, but obviously only for the winner of this game. Interesting matchup. I thought the Arkansas defense really struggled last week with the ability of Matt Corral to beat them with both his arm and his legs. And I think where this week could go better for that Arkansas defense is while Bo Nix is a major pain to bring down when he's scrambling and running around, he hasn't shown the consistency in the passing game for Arkansas to necessarily have to worry about that like they did last week. So maybe you can focus more on preventing Nix from getting out of the pocket with a little bit more spying. That may be due to the dangerousness of the Ole Miss passing game. You couldn't really get into that a week ago for Barry Odom's defense. So I think that bodes well for Arkansas. Offensive side of the ball for the Hogs, probably Gator Jefferson's best game of his career last week. Not quite the polished passer you want, but did a decent job in the intermediate passing game. Always can hit that deep ball. Burks is probably the best receiver in this league now that Keyshawn Butte is done for the year. And Jefferson, the runner, of course, just welcomes contact, loves trucking linebackers and defensive backs. So just an all-around quarterback. Kendall Briles is doing a great job with him. And I think playing against an Auburn defense that still is not probably 100% healthy, not sure quite of the statuses of Owen Popo and T.D. Moultrie, who might be out again this week for the Tigers. Brian Harsin doesn't really reveal much of that. So won't know him closer till game time, but I think that definitely favors Arkansas. Offensive line doing a pretty good job. Obviously, Georgia kind of overwhelmed them, but against anyone not named Georgia, that unit should have a ton of success. So I like Arkansas here. Line's about 3.5. I'm thinking 34-24, 35-24. Decent game, but I think the Hogs get back on track, get to 5-2, and both teams a much-needed reprieve next week. Auburn with the week off. Arkansas gets Pine Bluff, followed by their own week off. So tough early schedules for those two teams, maybe the toughest in the country, but there is a break coming. And it'll be a happy break for whoever emerges victorious Saturday afternoon in Fayetteville. Concurrent to that one over on ESPN, straight out of game day, it'll be Florida-LSU. What kind of fight do the Tigers have left? Just literally 2 minutes before I started recording this, LSU announced that Eli Ricks is out for the year, so now down Eli Ricks, Derek Stingley, and Keyshawn Butte. I might get Glenn Logan back on that defensive front, which should help them, but ton of injuries for the Tigers this year, compounding all the other issues they're having with the inability to run the football, and just quite a mess in Baton Rouge. So 11 a.m. kick means probably a pretty sleepy crowd there in Tiger Stadium. That should play well into the hands of Florida. Coming on the road in a rivalry that's been pretty feisty, pretty chippy. Schools, programs don't really like each other. This Gators team, I don't see a huge weakness in them, but every game they seem to go through lapses, either on one or both sides of the ball. That has derailed their chances against Alabama, cost them the game against Kentucky, even left Dan Mullen pretty frustrated, at least at halftime last week against Vanderbilt. So that's my concern with Florida, is not necessarily a big Achilles heel for them. It's just in game they seem to go through lapses when you're playing a good team. I'm not saying LSU is one of those teams, but it's going to cost you, and that's what I worry about coming up in a couple weeks in the cocktail party. But first Saturday in the short term, I think Florida wins, but I think LSU plays well, even with the losses and the injuries they have. I think they'll show some fight for Coach O in what definitely could be his final game. I could see that happening Sunday. They might wait until the off week. Who knows how long it goes, but I think after the Kentucky performance, I think it is on the table to happen as early as Sunday for LSU to part ways with Coach O. I think Florida wins. I think it's close, 3 to 7 points, so I would take the 10.5. Again, I don't trust this Gators team to get 60 minutes out of them to be able to run away with this game and make it a blowout, kind of like Kentucky did. So Florida wins. LSU fights hard. Maybe it buys Coach O another week. It's going to end at some point, but I think this is actually a pretty competitive game between two teams that, again, do not like each other one bit. Third noon Eastern game as well in Columbia, Texas A&M and Missouri. Met every year, I believe, for 5 years in a row, kind of late in their Big 12, early SEC tenure, but haven't met since 2014, so it's been a while. It's the Aggies and Tigers have been on the same field. Question is the new Zach Calzada the new quarterback we saw last week against Alabama, or was that just a one-off, incredible out-of-the-blue performance? Could he revert back to the struggles we saw with Arkansas, a little bit with Mississippi State, certainly in his first action of the year against Colorado? Or have they figured something out now using the weapons that they have and the versatility with guys like A-Chain and Isaiah Spiller? And finally, maybe getting Jalen Weidermeyer more involved at the tight end position. Is that the new A&M offense for the second half of the year, or was that just the perfect game? Calzada was on fire, Alabama wasn't quite dialed in, and they pulled off maybe the upset of the season. I don't know. With this being a trap game, 11 a.m., Missouri fans not super pumped about this team the way they've been playing. Could be pretty sleepy atmosphere. So a big week for Jimbo Fisher to have his team's emotions at the level where they want to be. Move on from Alabama. That game is over. Recalibrate your goals. Let's see if we can maybe sneak back into this SEC West race. Certainly a New Year's Six option is probably back on the table for the Aggies should they win out. So can they stay focused against a Missouri team that's pretty good on offense? Defense is still a mess. So again, if this A&M offense is right, they should be able to get probably into the 40s, which should be enough with still a pretty good defense. But I'm not convinced. They might not take a couple steps back here. So I think A&M wins, but I think Missouri's offense, which has played pretty well, just in that Tennessee blowout a couple weeks ago, they got so far behind, they just couldn't do what they wanted to do, particularly in the run game with Tyler Beatty, because they just had to keep throwing to try to get back into that game. Of course, never did, but I don't quite see that happening on Saturday. So I'm going 38-31 Aggies. Decent game. I think Missouri does have a legit shot at this. With the number at 9, that tells you Vegas also thinks Missouri could hang around in this game, so I wouldn't bet that at that number. But I think it's a decent game. I think A&M gets through it, but I think there will be a bit of a letdown for the Aggies, naturally, given what happened last Saturday night against Alabama. To the late afternoon window, Kentucky and Georgia. 6-0 versus 6-0. Great stat from Cole Kubelik earlier. This is the first time since the division split 30 years ago. We've had two SEC East teams at 6-0 or better going head-to-head. It's happened a number of times in the West. Obviously, the LSU-Alabama games. Had an LSU-Auburn game in Cam's year. I believe we had an A&M-Alabama game 4 or 5 years ago. So it happens a lot in the West, but this is new for the East. And you would think, oh, well, it's probably going to be Georgia-Florida. No, it's Kentucky. They're 6-0, 23-point dogs going to Athens. Only scored 3 points combined in the past 2 meetings. Is this offensive line going to be able to do better than what Arkansas did and what Auburn did? And I think this is a pretty good line, but I don't think they're that much better than either of those two teams to think, oh, wow, the running game's going to go in and push Jordan Davis around and kind of blow up Nakobe Dean and Nolan Smith and set the edge. That's just such a hard ask against this Georgia front seven. So even as well as Kentucky runs the football, the passing game, again, they're good for 1 or 2 big plays a game, which is progress for this passing offense from where they've been in years past. But they're never going to get that consistent performance from Will Levis in the passing game if he's forced to throw 30 times or whatnot. They're at their best when he's throwing 18 to 20 a game. But I just don't think that's the recipe for success against this Georgia defense. Not that there really is a recipe for success. So for the Dogs, again, it looks like Stetson Bennett will make another start. He's managed the game well. Running game cracked 200 against Auburn last week. I think they can do that again. I think we're looking at another kind of slow burn game where it might be, 14-6 Georgia at halftime. Maybe Kentucky's defense plays well for at least 30 minutes, but the Dogs pull away. I'm thinking 31-6, 31-7. So a few more points in the past couple of years for the Wildcats in this one, but no real danger for Georgia. They should cruise into their bye week at 7-0 and looking forward to the cocktail party in a couple weeks. Vandy, South Carolina, obviously not a whole lot to say there. Line's 18.5. I just think that's too many points for the South Carolina offense. I hate betting Vanderbilt against anybody, but given what we've seen from the Gamecocks, I just don't see, even against the Vanderbilt defense, it's been pretty bad. Although they did do a decent job for a half, at least I thought, against Florida last week. I don't think South Carolina gets more than probably in the upper 20s, maybe 30 points. So at that time, you only really need 13, 14 points for Vanderbilt to get a cover here. So I'll take those 18.5. Gamecocks again. Kevin Harris showing a little bit of spunk the past couple weeks, but just a very ugly offense from what we've seen from Shane Beamer's team. Maybe they get it right this week against the bad Vanderbilt team, but didn't show much against the Tennessee defense. It's pretty mad last week, so to expect them to have that much more success even against Vanderbilt, I think that's a difficult ask. So I'll take those 18.5 points, and that's all we're going to say about the Gamecocks and the Doors. Prime time, Alabama, Mississippi State, ESPN game. Can Bama solve some of their issues? Red zone offense was a mess last week. Again, they had 4 trips inside the 20 where they did not score a touchdown. That can't happen with the talent they have. Mississippi State's got a really good run defense, so should Alabama find themselves in the red zone, and I think they're more apt to this year because they're less explosive, they're not getting those 40, 50-yard touchdowns to Devontae and to Jalen Waddle like we saw last year. They're having to finish drives, and with Mississippi State's run defense being pretty good, will they try and run the ball more with Brian Robinson last week than they did last week in the red zone? Will they try and keep throwing it because of the strength of that Bulldog defense? Some tough questions for Bill O'Brien, I think. But if Alabama does figure out the red zone, I don't see any real danger in this game. But if they struggle again, this Bulldog team could threaten them. Again, for the defense, the coverage issues we talked about on Sunday from last week's game, so many breakdowns that are just, you don't see that very often from an Alabama defense. If those get cleaned up, I think they'll be all right. Just tackle on the catch, forcing Mississippi State to go 13, 14, 15 plays to score touchdowns. That's a tough ask for any quarterback, even as accurate as Will Rogers is, but eventually you're just going to make a mistake. Throw an errant ball, get yourselves in 3rd and 12, and it's just not going to end well. So that's the key thing for Alabama, as it usually is, playing a Mike Leach offense. Give up the short stuff, tackle the catch, and if you're forcing teams to go 14 or 15 plays for a touchdown, more than likely there's going to be a sack, an errant throw, an interception at some point along the way. So if they clean that up, I think they'll be fine. I think it's a decent game. I'd probably take the 17 with Mississippi State. I just saw enough flaws from Alabama to think those all won't get fixed in 1 week. They probably will by the end of the season, but for 1 week going back out on the road, I think there'll be some struggles. So I'm kind of in the 34 to 20 range. I'll take State to cover, maybe a game that kind of goes back and forth between a 2-score and a 1-score game in the second half, where State just can't get that one stop to be able to get the ball back with a chance to go down and tie or take the lead. So Alabama survives, but I think there'll still be some lingering questions about, is this team as good as we thought they were a couple weeks back, and will they be ready to go by the time they presumably see Georgia 6 or 7 weeks down the road in Atlanta. And the nightcap, Ole Miss and Tennessee, fun one. Should be a shootout for Lane Kiffin's first game back as a head coach in Neyland Stadium. They'll still want his blood there in Rocky Top, even 12 years after the fact. They still hold some grudges from that ugly night in January back in 2010 when he up and left for USC. So, and also not just about Lane Kiffin. They like this team. They've been a lot of fun, scoring 107 points, I guess, and combined the last 2 weeks against Missouri and South Carolina, clicking on all cylinders, and they're fun. And that's what we asked for this Tennessee team to be this year, was just fun. Be Ole Miss 2020. You're probably not going to win more than 6, potentially 7 games. But scare somebody, get yourselves in some shootouts, and be an entertaining product. And they've certainly been that for most of the year. So with 100,000 in Neyland, I think it's a great matchup. I think the over-under at 79, boy, that's tough to take over when a number is that high. I'm not sure I've ever seen a Power 5 game with an over-under that high. And I think the difference here is going to be if you get yourselves in a shootout, and I saw that last week with Arkansas, where if this game gets into the 40s and 50s, I start to like Ole Miss's chances more. I picked Arkansas, but once it started getting into the 40s, I thought Ole Miss was going to pull it out, even if that game had gone to overtime. Had Arkansas not gone for 2, and I think we could see something similar here. Ole Miss probably won't get pushed around in the trenches like they did against Alabama, and should they not, I have to ride with Matt Corral as the best quarterback in the country. So Ole Miss -3. I guess I'd lean with the Rebels, maybe 41-35, 42-35 type score. I guess this favors the under a bit. It's just so hard to take an over at that number. We could see another 52-51 game the way these offenses are playing. Wouldn't shock me. I think Ole Miss survives, but another quality performance from Tennessee that will leave this fan base pretty pumped. And if Alabama struggles again, there could be some buzz when they go to Tuscaloosa next week, and that, hey, we can play for 60 minutes with this Alabama team. They're not great. We can score. I think that's the goal, again, for this Tennessee season, is just to compete with a couple teams you weren't expecting to compete with, steal a win or two, which they've done at least one against Missouri. No one really saw that coming back in the preseason. So far, so good from Josh Heupel. A chance for a huge, huge win on Saturday night. I think they fall just short, but overall another good performance from the Vols. And Ole Miss stays hot and stays alive for at least a potential Sugar Bowl berth down the road. think that wraps up. Yeah, that's all 7. I'll go around the country quickly. Friday night, 2 interesting games. Clemson, Syracuse, Cal, Oregon, both about 2 touchdown favorites. Both offenses are a little bit of turmoil right now. Oregon, due to injuries, they've lost C.J. Verdell. Offensive coordinator Joe Moorhead had surgery a couple weeks back. So can the Ducks retool this offense as they head into the meat of their Pac-12 season, and still with some playoff hopes and certainly conference title hopes there? Clemson, can the offense finally figure some stuff out? Good situation advantage for them going up to Syracuse, where they lost on a Friday night a few years back, but they were off last week. Syracuse went to overtime with Wake Forest, now coming back on a short week. Advantageous spot for the Tigers, but until we see this offense actually function, it's hard to say they're fixed, and that's a lot of points to lay against an unimproved and pretty plucky Syracuse team. That's Friday night. Early window Saturday, I'd highlight UCF Cincinnati. UCF still hasn't really figured out the quarterback position since Dylan Gabriel went down. So I think the Bearcats are fine, but for them, against just handling the week-to-week pressure of having this target on your back, dealing with the noise of the playoff talk that's coming once the rankings start coming out in a couple weeks, how do they handle that? They're good. I think SMU's probably the only team that can get them in the AAC. They'll play them in late November and probably again for the conference title. So I think the Bearcats will be okay for a while, but it's just a lot of pressure now with that Notre Dame game behind them. They got 2 months of being the target. Can they handle that? Again, I think they're fine this week against UCF. But it's going to be a long grind where just they have to take it one game at a time to be able to get to the finish line and maybe sneak into that college football playoff. And 2 interesting ones in the Big Ten, kind of kitchen sink games for Nebraska and Indiana. Nebraska on the road at Minnesota at 3 and 4. They probably need to get this one if they want to get to a bowl game, with games against Iowa, Ohio State, Wisconsin still left on the schedule. So Huskers really need this one if it's a close game. Can they finally get over the hump and figure something out in a close game under Scott Frost? And then Indiana, Vegas thinks it's going to be a decent game. They've lost 3 games, been blown out by Penn State, been blown out by Iowa, but only 4.5-point dogs at home against Michigan State. They need to get this one. For Sparty, they got a week off coming up before the round robin starts with Michigan, Michigan State, Ohio State, and Penn State coming up in late October and early November. So a tricky spot for them to not look too far ahead against an Indiana team. It's pretty underwhelming. Noon kick in Bloomington, sleepy atmosphere. Can Mel Tucker's team stay dialed in and get to 7-0? We'll touch on that one again coming up in Best Bets about whether or not I'm taking that bait on that 4.5-point line. Late afternoon window, Purdue and Iowa. Purdue facing a number 2 team for the first time since 2018 when Ohio State came to West Lafayette and went home 49-20 losers in that crazy game, the rumble for Tyler Trent that night there in West Lafayette. Certainly a memorable night for all Boilers fans. They'd love another one Saturday afternoon in Iowa City. Probably a letdown spot for the Hawkeyes coming off the Penn State game. Offense still not really clicking on all cylinders consistently. So I could see that game being a struggle for the Hawkeyes. Purdue not a great team, but I would not count on an easy, comfortable win for Iowa heading into the bye week of their own coming up next week. Pitt, Virginia Tech, fun game in the ACC Coastal. I think the winner of that game positioned themselves nicely to potentially get to Charlotte in the conference title game. Kenny Pickett, hate mentioning the H word this early, but he's at least on the board, I think, given the way he's played and the number he's putting up, albeit against a pretty weak schedule over the first month. Pitt off an idle week, Virginia Tech off a heartbreaking loss to Notre Dame, so situational edge to Pitt. I think that's being weighed in the Panthers being a 5-point road favorite there in Blacksburg. Other late afternoon games, BYU Baylor, lost a little bit of luster with BYU losing last week. Got the Jeff Grimes factor, former BYU OC, now at Baylor. Bears, obviously, their focus is trying to get to the Big 12 title game. Only one conference loss so far, have that big win over Iowa State, which could pay dividends down the road. So this won't factor into that one. And with BYU undefeated, again, maybe there's not quite that much hype around Waco for this one as we thought there would be, but still with the Grimes factor and 2 teams that I don't know if they've ever played. If they haven't, it's been a while, but an interesting matchup at least there between the Cougars and Bears. And game I have to mention because we thought it'd be a heck of a game in the preseason, probably would decide who goes to the ACC title game. Not the case. Miami and North Carolina, both teams with 3 losses. Manny Diaz potentially on the hot seat. Mac Brown blaming the media for the preseason hype for this team. I don't know what the heck that was. He needs to worry about his own team and give less of a damn about what they're being talked about or what's being said about them in the media. But I wouldn't say both teams are out, but with a couple conference losses, Miami, I guess, only with 1, but UNC with 3, they probably have to win out to have a shot at the division. But two of the most disappointing teams in the country for sure in the winter, maybe with a chance to right the ship a bit, but they'll lose I think you can officially bury them as a complete failure for the 2021 season. Night games, TCU and Oklahoma. Frogs are pretty banged up, might be without Max Duggan. If they don't have him, I think Oklahoma's fine, even though they've been struggling to put away anybody outside of FCS teams this year. So the interesting thing, of course, will be, is Caleb Williams the guy? Will Spencer Rattler play? Will Spencer Rattler stick around? A lot of drama in Norman this week at the quarterback position. But again, if TCU does not have Duggan, he's the catalyst for that offense, that team. And if he's not there, I don't see any way the Sooners slip up here. They go into a kind of an easier portion of their schedule. Their real tough games are at the end of the year when they have Baylor, Iowa State, and Oklahoma State to close it out. But a couple easy games coming up here, potentially starting with TCU again if Duggan's unavailable, with Texas Tech and Kansas coming up for the Sooners. Also prime time, we have Farmageddon, Iowa State at Kansas State. Fun match up there. Both teams need this one to keep any hopes of a Big 12 title game appearance alive. Huge win for the Cyclones last year. I think it was 45-0, but they've struggled in Manhattan. K-State always a tough team with Skylar Thompson, so good matchup there between two head coaches. Corn versus wheat, I guess, as they call it for Farmageddon. Stanford, Washington State, interesting game in the Pac-12. NC State, Boston College, potential elimination game for ACC Atlantic title chances. NC State still undefeated in league play, have the win over Clemson, so if they can get BC, maybe they set themselves up to potentially play a winner-take-all game later in the season against Wake Forest. So big game for them. BC certainly not out of it, just that one loss to Clemson. And should be a pretty good atmosphere up in Chestnut Hill. I think BC fans are pretty pumped about this team, like Jeff Hafley. Got that big home win over Missouri. Should have beaten Clemson a couple weeks ago. So, again, I think that's a unique matchup in the Coastal. And now both divisions. Usually we know the Atlantic champion, and the Coastal is the one that's chaotic with, a bunch of 4-3 teams going down to the wire to see who gets to Charlotte. This year, I think we'll probably have both divisions coming down to the wire with some tiebreakers potentially coming into play. So fun stuff in the ACC, and that's the good side of that league not having a great team this year. And let's see, Army, Wisconsin, fun game in the Big Ten. Army scared Michigan and Oklahoma past couple of years. Can they do it again in Madison? Late night, Air Force, Boise State, Mountain West. Probably the winner takes that division, I'd say, early in the season to call that. But probably the two best teams in that side of the Mountain West. So the winner of that game probably in good shape to play for a league title coming up in December. Similar situation in the Pac-12 South. Arizona State and Utah, both undefeated in league play. Winner of that game in Salt Lake City very much has the inside track. I would say Utah has that win over USC in the bag. Arizona State's already won at UCLA, so I think the winner of that game, most likely your Pac-12 South champion. I like the Sun Devils. And got to mention UTEP, potential bowl eligibility if they can upset Louisiana Tech. Again, great story for the Miners. 5 wins over the past 3 years, sitting at 5-1 right now, can get to 6, and a likely bowl bid with a win on Saturday night in El Paso against Louisiana Tech. That should wrap up the look around the nation, give you a couple best bets here. Virginia minus 11 against Duke. I like the Cavaliers there. Duke's okay, but I think Virginia's offense is so locked in right now, they should be able to get at least into the 40s and pull away late. Indiana, as I mentioned earlier, 4.5-point dog at home against Michigan State. That line seems like a trap. They want you to take Michigan State. I'm not going to take the bait. I'm going to go the other way and take the Hoosiers plus 4.5 in a game they have to win to have any hopes of saving their season. I'll call for an upset in the old brass spittoon, another great Big Ten trophy game as the Hoosiers get one against MSU. Farmageddon, KSU is plus 6.5 against Iowa State. I think that's too many points at home for the Wildcats. Give me those 6.5. And Kansas State, UCLA plus 2 at Washington. I like the Bruins in that spot. I think they're the better team. Washington kind of out of sight, out of mind since those first 2 losses to Montana and Michigan. Beat Cal in overtime, lost at the gun to Oregon State. So just a very so-so team, but getting UCLA, who I think is the better team, and points, I'll take the Bruins, even though it's only plus 2. And BC and NC State, I think it's a coaching advantage for Boston College. Jeff Hafley against Dave Doran. BC's at home. They're getting a field goal now, so give me those 3 points in Boston College. I feel good about at least a push there. So that will wrap it up. Week 7 preview. Again, not quite the loaded slate we've seen in the past couple weeks as we go into not a quiet stretch. It's college football, for God's sake. But 2 weeks were on paper at least. The schedule doesn't look quite as sexy as it has been. And then coming up October 30th, once the Big Ten round robin in the East Division gets started, really loaded slate. And November is always a heck of a lot of fun. So, again, something crazy will happen this weekend. Hard to pinpoint it exactly, but it's college football, and that's why we love it. Even on these weekends that don't look great on paper, it'll leave us with our jaws on the floor at some point on Saturday. So, thanks so much for watching, guys. Please like, subscribe to the channel. Reach out to me on Twitter, of course, at MattSmithCFB. I'll have my written preview up on SouthernPigskin.com late Wednesday night or early Thursday morning. Please check that out. We go a lot more in depth on the 7 SEC games. Got some trivia questions for you. Look back on a memorable game from 11 years ago now in the best game I've ever watched series on October 16th. Fun one between Arkansas and Auburn. Cam Newton and Tyler Wilson in a duel. Not for the ages, I would say, but quite a fun shootout in that game. So feel free to relive that one as well in the story. And I will be back probably sometime Sunday. I have some traveling on Sunday, but I'll try and get you a recap video at some point to recap the happenings of Saturday. So again, thanks so much for watching, guys. I'll talk to y'all soon.